Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. We have a Japanese flavour on the show today as Dan Orlowitz is back on Acsom. I think it's the first time in maybe 18 months, Dan, that you're joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.
Something like that, and boy, a lot has changed in those 18 months.
Yeah, you could say that again. Liam Carrigan is also joining us, resplendent in his Japanese top. It's the only time you get to wear a blue football jersey is when you're representing Japan, Liam.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure how much of a blue and white jersey would go down with the audience, but hopefully I don't get lynched.
Talking of lynching, you know we all love the old football jersey chat. Liam, I know you're a fan. Kevin Graham, who appeared on episode 1 of the Celtic State of Mind, and he's still here, still doing his thing. He was on yesterday. He was at one of these fans forums a few years ago, and it was New Balance, and they were talking about all these different ideas that they had for away jerseys and third jerseys. And one of the ones that they tried to push to the Celtic fans who were present was a brown jersey. They were saying, this could be like the St. Pauli crossover jersey, and some of the fans were like, oh, I get that. And then their idea was to launch a blue jersey. And everybody just looked at them in amazement because they had all these stats from global jersey sales, and they were trying to convince Celtic fans a blue away jersey was a good idea. Suffice to say, it didn't happen, and hopefully it never, ever happens. There's lots to talk about, and to save Dan's fingers on Twitter, we thought, you know what, you're best just to come on for 20 minutes or so, Dan, and give us a bit of the lowdown. Before we do all that, let's have a wee chat about last night. I'll start with yourself, Liam. How are you feeling today? We've just been hammered 5-1, but as I was saying before we came on, I'm not feeling too disheartened by it.
No, I mean, the thing is, on their day, Real Madrid can do that to anybody, and I mean anybody in world football. That's the reality of it. No, I mean, I'd rather stupidly said the other day we were going to win 3-0, but that was purely because I thought we're out the tournament, and that is the Scottish thing to do, to go out and win when it doesn't matter, right? But no, I don't feel that bad about it, because I think it's like every game in the Champions League this season, even games where we've been beaten or we haven't won, we've not looked complete there or depth. We've competed, And ultimately, yeah, Madrid just stepped up and pulled away from us last night. But that's the only game in the Champions League this season where I think we've had what you would call a doing. I think like the other games we've at least competed. Even the Leipzig games where we were disappointed with the performance as well as the result, but I think we competed, and that's a big step forward. That's something to build on for next season.
Yeah, it is now. Dan, you came on a wee while back and you were talking about the approach that Ange had to any game of football, not just the big games, not the domestic games, any game. And there was comments around, he would rather win 5-4. Now, he has since said that himself, Dan. He would rather win 5-4 than 1-0. But often what happens is you come up against a side like Real Madrid last night, and Liam said it quite rightly, they could be on their day anyone by the same margin. 5 times Champions League winners in the last 10 years. But we played our game and stuck to his principles. Do you think that when you do that, you are less likely to take a pasting? Can you imagine Celtic going out and trying to defend at the Bernabeu last night? It would have potentially been even worse.
I think that when you go out, when you play the way you believe in, then it's better in the long run for your team because the players believe in what you're doing. The fans believe in what you're doing. Just looking at the reactions on Twitter, on YouTube to this result, it's a much different world in Celtic land than when I came on 18 months ago and I was trying to explain what Ange believes in and this attacking philosophy. And I think a lot of fans at the time were hesitant and maybe didn't believe me at the time. I'm not going to come out and say I told you so, but Ange is exactly who we knew he was. And I think over the long run, it's good. I think that it's great for a team to have a philosophy. You know what you're getting at, and yes, there will be good days, and there will be struggles, and there will be bad days. But I would rather my coach and my players go out onto the pitch with a philosophy, with something that they're clearly trying to accomplish, because at least I know what I believe in. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what we're getting from Celtic fandom right now, is that I think that Ange has made everyone a believer. And the next step is obviously getting better players and getting used to playing Champions League football year in and year out. That's the goal. You have to keep at it, and eventually some of those draws will turn into wins, and some of those losses will turn into draws, and then you're really turning heads.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was looking at that last night, and I've been saying it all throughout the campaign, Liam. That lack of experience, and I don't mean age experience. I just mean experience within that sphere, within that bubble of playing a high standard, a team like Real Madrid. And you take someone like Luka Modric, who is one of the most talented footballers of his generation, and he's played more Champions League football than the entire Celtic starting lineup combined. Now that does speak volumes, because a lot of those Celtic players now have got half a dozen games under their belt, Liam. So when you come back next season, and we hope that we do come back next season to the same level, you hope that that's galvanised them. It's got rid of some of the anxieties that they've spoken about as well, and we can see the true free flowing nature of their game that we see domestically.
Yeah, I mean it's an experience. It's a learning process, and it's actually interesting what Dan brings up there, because back be 3 years ago now, the first time I experienced Ange's style of football was watching Yokohama play Man City in a pre-season friendly, and you could see the exact same philosophy there. They got beat 3-1, but they had a real goal, and they got applauded off the pitch, and they really were. Yokohama were a very good team to watch that night. Even though it was basically a Kevin De Bruyne masterclass in the end. It was the difference between the two teams, but I just think that you see that same understanding now with the Celtic supporters. Losing 5-1 to Real Madrid is not shameful in any way, because it could happen to anybody. In the same way that Yokohama put up a good fight against Man City that night, Ange has now got the same thing going through Celtic, albeit in a competitive sense as opposed to just a pre-season friendly like that was.
Yeah, without a doubt. We want to run through, we have a level of expertise here on Acsom in relation to what is happening in Japanese football, potentially what that will mean for Celtic's new recruits and new signings in January. I want to start off, though, by looking at the omission. It's been big news this week of two of Celtic's star players, Kyogo and Hatate. You watched that game last night, Dan. I think Hatate, for me, is one of those players who has put in quite a few performances at the Champions League level that will hold him in good stead. I hope that it doesn't result in too many clubs circling Celtic Park in their vulturous ways to try and prize him away from Ange Postecoglou. But they didn't make Japan's World Cup squad. Now, that came as a surprise over here, Dan. What was the reaction over in Japan?
I think that for the most part, Hatate's omission was expected, and I say that was expected because he hadn't found a place in the squad in the build-up to this World Cup. He'd only had a couple of appearances, really. The longest coming against Vietnam. I believe the longest was against Vietnam in the March Dead Rubber, the World Cup qualifier, and he didn't really impress. But he didn't impress because it was a B-side that wasn't used to playing with each other. He just hasn't had the time with the blue shirt that he needed to put himself into the picture. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, Japan has always had one or two players who have been on the bubble and just haven't made it for whatever reason, even though they've looked really good domestically or in continental competition. Shunsuke Nakamura in 2002 was a great example of that. You go to 2010 when a lot of people were calling for Shinji Kagawa to be added. You go up to 2018 and Shoya Nakajima was very much talked about as someone who could have made an impact in that Japan squad. None of them got picked up, but what matters is going forward and how Hatate will take this and how he'll be carrying maybe a chip on his shoulder, and maybe that will benefit him. As far as Kyogo is concerned, I think that there's a bit more debate. I think that some people would rather see him in that squad, especially over Takuma Asano, who I'm not sure if he's going to be 100% back from his injury by the time they get to Qatar. The JFA's medical staff is pretty confident in that, and Moriyasu said that on Tuesday. I would personally rather have Kyogo in the squad, but I think that Daisen Maida's selection fills a need to be able to for whoever's up front to be able to drop back and contribute defensively in the event of a counter, and I think that you sort of need that against Germany, against Spain. So it all makes sense logically. I know that Celtic fans are seeing two very different versions of these players than what Japan supporters have seen and what Hajime Moriyasu has seen. And that's weird to reconcile, but that's where we're at.
You know, that is interesting, because all the conversations we've had, Liam, about Celtic's recruits have been around the fact that, you know, you're a massive fan of Maeda. He hasn't impressed to the same level as Kyogo or Hatate across the piece. Although I do like Maeda, I'm a fan, and I'm glad he started last night. But is that something that, you know, Dan has just spoken about, the impression that we have of the three players compared to maybe the impression that you guys have over there? Is this kind of strengthening that view that you've had on Maeda?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Dan said there. The inclusion of Maeda for me was never in doubt. I personally thought Kyogo was going to get in, but if you look at his games for Japan in the last year or so, Kyogo has not done it really for Japan. He's not shown the same flair, the same brilliance that he has at Celtic. You know, if you remember last season's League Cup final, Kyogo basically won that game single-handedly, right? He's never had a moment like that for Japan. And it's because Japan is a kind of team that it's a big emphasis on the team as a unit. There's not so much space for individuals, which could also go some way to explaining why Moriyasu doesn't really fancy Hatate at the moment, because he's an individual flair player. And Japan's system doesn't really accommodate individual flair players. It's about the team dynamic. And Maeda, with his engine, with his backtracking, as Dan says, is exactly the kind of player that Moriyasu likes. And they have a history, because Moriyasu picked him for the Olympic team when he was the Olympic coach as well. So, yeah. But I think to kind of summarise it, Japan is a team that picks Daisen Maeda for a particular role, and they have that role for him. Whereas Celtic, Maeda has to adapt his game to play the role that Celtic need him to play, not necessarily his best role. And I think that's where you have this kind of detachment in terms of expectations.
Watching from afar, Dan, how impressed have you been? I want to actually ask you about Ideguchi in a second, but how impressed have you been, and have Hatate, Kyogo or Maeda surprised you with their transition to Scottish football?
I believe when the trio, the three winter transfers were announced, I did tout Hatate as having the highest ceiling, and I still believe that's true. But I thought he would take more time to adapt. The way that he exploded into the starting 11 and made the immediate impact that he did surprise me. And you know, it's nice to have good surprises in this game. Sometimes I think you expect a lot of things from a player and you don't get it. But Hatate has just blown us all away, and I'm really impressed with how he's done. I know that at the end of last season he was flagging a bit. He did get the summer to rest. He's looked very good, I think, over the course of the season, and I think he's getting more used to the role within Ange's squad and playing in the Premiership week in and week out, and playing in the Champions League. For a player who is only in his third professional season, third professional year, to come into the Champions League and make the impact that he has is remarkable. And Kyogo, I think, is Kyogo. I think that the debate is over in a way as to how good Kyogo is. I think we can all mostly agree. His form in the Champions League hasn't quite been there, but that's an experience thing. I think he'll get there. And Maeda is developing into a sort of a cult hero in a good way. And I think that, as I described him, he's always been this sort of stone cold killer, and he'll close out the game for you. He will get goals on occasion, but it's just his pace. It's we should all be so lucky to have such stamina in anything. Just to see him run up and down, he's doing laps around the pitch after the game ends. It's incredible. So they've all accounted very well for themselves over there, and I think that the Japanese football community has taken note of that, and I think that they do get that recognition.
Superb. Before we move on to Edoguchi then, you mentioned Nakamura earlier on, and obviously the news filtered in that he has finally hung up his boots. Liam, he's older than you and I, isn't he? In fact, he's older than all three of us, I think. And he was still playing until fairly recently. I mean, how big a personality, a profile, an icon, just to let us all understand, because obviously he's a big hero for Celtic fans, modern day Celtic fans. I think he left in 2009, didn't he? So explain to us how big an icon he is over in Japan, Liam.
Well, I mean, Dan, feel free to contradict me here if you think I'm speaking out of turn. But I think at the moment it's kind of a two-way debate as to who is Japan's greatest player of all time. It's either Nakamura or Nakata. It's like a kind of back and forth debate between the two, I think. He is an icon. He regularly pops up on TV specials, some of which you've probably seen on YouTube, you know, launching a ball across a banquet hall to kick the bride and groom off a wedding cake, launching the ball into a moving bus from like 30 yards away. You know, I mean, it's sort of things which... if he wants a second career as a circus performer, he's probably onto a good thing there.
Right, for sure.
I will say that is a tough debate, and the reason is because I think that they've both contributed to the development of Japanese football in such different ways. And one was that Nakata was the first J League player to really go from the J League to a top European league and be successful. Yeah. And even though his career in Europe did sort of peter out near the end, I mean, what he did in Perugia, what he did at Roma, I mean, that was all very important. But then for Shunsuke to go to Italy and succeed, to Celtic and succeed wildly, just for him to get that many accolades as a player, for him to score arguably one of the most celebrated goals in Champions League history. You all know the one. I just need to say that, and everyone watching knows the one.
That was on my birthday.
There you go. What a present. But
yes.
I think that Shunsuke's legacy is, I want to say tainted, but it is complicated by the fact that he didn't contribute as much to the national team as I think we all have in mind. In fact, I mentioned Shinji Kagawa's admission from the 2010 squad earlier. Most were calling for Nakamura to be left off for Shinji Kagawa in 2010. He had a very poor showing. I believe it was Espanola that he went to.
Yeah, Espanyol. Yeah.
And it didn't work, and so he came to back to Yokohama in 2010, and that was to get fit and to get back into the World Cup picture. And he did go to South Africa, but I believe he only made one appearance off the bench, and that was it. So it was a very weird ending to his national team career. And even though he did have another decade plus left in him domestically, won MVP with Marinos in 2013, even though he never won the J1 with Marinos, which is... So he was successful, but it was a very weird career track if you really zoom back and look at how that career progressed. But undoubtedly one of the greats. I think that if you're arguing Nakata or Nakamura, it gets complicated, but undoubtedly they have both contributed so much to this culture.
Yeah, for sure. You know, when we're looking at the transition and how incredible it is that 3 of the 4 players that have come in from Japanese football have really hit the ground running and you know, made a big impression at Celtic. The one that we always go back to, and I keep asking Liam about him, is Yusuke Ideguchi. And, you know, I know he has been unlucky with injuries, Liam, but I'm now at that stage where I'm wondering where it's going to go for him. You know, the recruitment's been excellent since Ange has come in. As I say, there's been some bad luck with Ideguchi. Do you still think, from what you've seen prior to his move to Celtic, that he can play a part for Ange?
I think so. But The problem is getting into the team at the moment, because the kind of central midfield role, we have so many options there. And even with Callum McGregor out injured, Gucci is still third or fourth in line at best. And, then you bring in like Abelgard, and where's he going to fit into that picture? So I think he has the ability to make it at Celtic. Whether he'll get the opportunity or not is another story, unfortunately.
Yeah. And again, that for me, when you're looking at that, that's the best case scenario for Ange, because he's got so many options. He just can't fit him in there at the moment. He's been here for almost a year, Dan. And obviously you start doubting whether or not the move's going to work out. What do you see happening with the Deguchi at Celtic?
It's tough. It's really... I think that he will be the one signing of the trio who didn't really work out. I just don't see it happening, and it's fine. It's not fine in that we would rather Ideguchi have found sort of a career revival at Celtic, but I think that if you look at the potential benefit that Ange saw in him, I think that it made sense at the time. It just didn't, not everyone works out. And I think, speaking of 2018, Yosuke Ideguchi was another player who probably should have been included in that squad for the Russia World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And if he gets chosen for that, then his career changes completely. I think he's on a completely different trajectory, because I still remember the goal he scored against Australia in qualifying in August 2017, I believe it was, and it just a rocket. And you saw that, and you saw so much potential in him. And I think that he's sort of the cautionary tale that now Rayo has to look at.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't see Ideguchi working out. But I'd be happy to be proven wrong.
If you bring 4 players in and 3 of them are a success, then it's a good ratio. Another player who we've been linked with, it looks as though it's a done deal, but you can tell me what the update is on Yuki Kobayashi. What type of a player will we be getting? Liam, I'll come to you first. We've been talking about strengthening at the back, and in particular in the centre half area. Just, we need that depth in there. What should we expect if we do this particular deal in January?
Well, if you remember back in summer 2020, we were linked with Ko Itakura, who is a very similar player, but Kobayashi's that wee bit younger, and I think he has the potential to be better than Itakura in the fullness of time. The thing is, it's a shame this World Cup is now. If the World Cup was maybe 9 months later, he might have a chance of breaking into that squad. But at the moment, Japan have got, Itakura playing well in the Bundesliga. So a Japanese a J-League player at the moment, no matter how well he's playing, is not going to displace a regular pick for one of the top Bundesliga sides, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like we were just saying there, Dan, one player may not have worked out so far, but it shouldn't prevent us from dipping into this market that Ange knows so well. Do you agree with Liam's sentiments on our potential new signing in January?
I think it's a very solid signing, not necessarily the sort of the star factor of Kyogo or Hatate, but in terms of his potential to contribute to the build-up. He's good at pressing. I think he'll contribute to getting the ball up the pitch. He's a smart player. I don't think you're going to see a lot of poor decisions. He's still young. I think he does still make mistakes, and Kobe haven't played very well this season. So, when you're a defender for a side that for most of the campaign was hovering around the drop zone and only managed to hop out in the last 2 or 3 rounds, it's not always going to reflect well on you as a defender. But I think that I agree with what Liam has said. The tools are there. The skill set is there. And I do think that he can be a very good fit for Ange's Celtic. And in terms of the national team picture, I do think that we are going to need depth at the central midfield position, because I believe we have, our 4 central defenders, I may have said midfielders just now, are Tomiyasu, who's doing pretty well at Celtic, Maya Yoshida, who's probably playing his last World Cup, Shogo Taniguchi, who's, I believe, 30, 31. I mean, he's getting a bit older, and Koi Takura, who I do still think has 1 or 2 World Cups left in him. The back line is an area that Japan does need to bring in the new generation on. I do think he has the potential to do that, especially if he can come on and get starts and even see some time in the Champions League. I mean, it's way too early to predict that, but Ange is 3 for 4 for Japanese players so far, and I think you keep going to that well until you're not catching anything.
Oh, for sure. One final thing, Dan. Liam and I have spoken time and time again about the impact of, Celtic having these Japanese stars and having that knowledge of Japanese football. But over here, it's difficult to know what the impact is in Japan. I mean, I would love to think that, in areas like Australia and America, and you go over and there's lots of Celtic fans, supporters, clubs. How big an impact has the Japanese imports or exports, in your case, made in terms of Celtic's brand over in Japan?
They are undoubtedly one of the best known European clubs in Japan at the moment. I go to Kamo and the various sort of football gear stores, and you see Celtic uniforms for sale, and it's just something normal. You see a lot more. You look at the buzz around the Twitter account. I haven't even checked to see how many followers the Japanese language Celtic account has, but it's phenomenal, and they've done a lot of great work in the last 15 months. To see that explosive growth is testament to what these players are doing, because if it's a club that is maybe, I'm thinking of clubs that are lower in the Spanish first tier, clubs that aren't in Europe as much, or maybe they don't have these marquee players, they aren't getting this following. Mm-hmm. And so I think that Celtic have always been the best known Scottish club in Japan. I think that's to Nakamura's credit. I think that's his legacy. Yeah. And the trio, Reo, Kyogo, and Daisen, have continued that. There have been rumors of a tour next summer. No confirmations yet. I don't have any inside information on that yet, but that has to be a pretty obvious one. If they still have Japanese, I assume that they will still have Japanese players at the club come May, June, July, and that tour will print money because it'll be a huge thing. Ange's homecoming, Kyogo's homecoming, Reo's homecoming, and it'll be such a big occasion to celebrate the fact that you have a Champions League club with these Japanese players, one of whom will have represented the country at the World Cup. And the hope is that things continue, because I think it's good to have that relationship.
That sounds phenomenal. I love to see it. And as you say, I want to ensure that all the top Japanese players we have are still at the club at that stage, Dan. It's always an absolute pleasure. You came on and scared us 18 months ago. We can look back on that now and say, you know what, you were right, and we've embraced it.
The defense worked itself out. I remember the look on Tony Haggerty's face, just the jaw dropped, and everyone thought I was insane. But no, I may have been a little insane, but it was. I think that all the excitement that all of us were trying to share with all the Celtic fans at the time who were not buying it, that's because we had seen Ange. We knew the kind of football he played. We knew the kind of teams he created, and we're happy that it's not that we're happy that we get to be right, but we're happy that another fandom, another country, another part of the world gets to share in the joy of Ange ball, because we are all truly witnesses in the end.
Oh, absolutely. Dan, it's an absolute pleasure. We'll no doubt hear from you again when you have a few things to answer, because, as I say, your Twitter must go into meltdown every time we are linked to a new player from Japanese football. I hope you enjoy the World Cup. Thank you so much for getting involved on A Celtic State of Mind. You're always welcome back.
thank you. Pleasure being on. Thanks for having me. Thank you to everyone who tweets and asks questions. We love spreading the gospel on the Japanese game and hope to keep doing so.
Nice one, Dan. You take care of yourself, all right?
You too, guys.
Cheers, pal. Thank you.
Cheers.
Liam,
Yes.
that was a very interesting insight from both yourself and Dan in relation to our links, and I hope they are going to continue to be strong links with Japanese football, because I love the idea of us going over to Sydney at the end of this year and then visiting Japan maybe in summer 2023. That for me sounds like, you know, something you and I have been banging on about. We need to tap into that market, don't we?
Aye, I mean, as I'll need to get in touch with Dan actually and find out where he saw those Celtic tops, because I've yet to see any. But obviously, that is something that if the club do a tour, that they can double down on. You know, they should have sort of pop-up stalls at whatever stadiums they're playing at, selling the merchandise. I mean, that was what Man City did, as I mentioned before, when they played Yokohama. Like, within about maybe like 2 or 3 square miles of the stadium was like this kind of closed-off zone that was just selling merchandise everywhere, you know? And Celtic will hopefully... Well, I mean, they probably look to get in touch with the same agency that arranged the Man City tour, probably, you know?
Yeah, and, you know, obviously a massive part of that is to make money. Of course it is, but it's about also strengthening that brand. Because, you know, you're introducing people to the history of this club. You said earlier that because of the nature of Japanese football, there are a lot of football fans over there who are all about trying to find out the historical relevance of a club like Celtic. So... Go over there, tap into that. If I was anything to do with the club, I'd be tapping into the knowledge of guys like yourself and Dan. Whilst I'm over there, you know, why not? You've got to look at the expertise over in Japan and see how we can do it right. We have a certain game of football to talk about from last night. We've not really focused on it a great deal. Mixed kind of comments coming through last night after the game. I was on there with Kevin McCluskey and Laura Bradburn. Some people, I think, felt Celtic had been brave in their pursuit of achieving what Ange wants us to achieve, whereas others felt, and by the way, I totally understand it, that we have approached it in a naive way. So let's have a wee look at some of the comments coming in. Stephen Sloan, a regular contributor on the chat. Last season we conceded 15 goals in the Europa League. This season we've conceded the same in the Champions League. This was our worst Champions League campaign with only 2 points. These are the facts. Well, you could look at it that way, but at the same time, Liam, maybe people think I'm a bit of a happy clapper in these last couple of days. I'm looking at it and thinking, you know what? First time we've been here for 5 years. 18 months ago, we could barely pull a defence together. And, you know, we were a fractured side, a bit of a fractured fan base at that time. We hadn't seen our team for a year. There had been, you know, protests outside the ground. We didn't know who was going to be the gaffer. When Ange comes in, we're trying to find out as much as we can about him. But 18 months on, and we're disappointed at not beating Shakhtar. We're disappointed at not getting results against Leipzig, and looking back on that game against Real Madrid at Celtic Park. Surely that's progress.
Well, I mean, just to pick up on that comment there. Now, thanks for getting in touch, Stephen. I mean, no disrespect to what I'm about to say here, but you kind of contradict your own argument with that comment, because last season we conceded 15 goals in the Europa League. This season we conceded 15 goals in the Champions League. Now, no one can deny that the Champions League is a higher level than the Europa League. So to make the step up and concede the same amount of goals, surely that would suggest that there's been improvement on the park.
Yeah, and you know, I watched the post-match. Ange is a gaffer who, you know, his pre-match and post-match press conferences, Liam, have become unmissable. Now you've been at the sharp end of that industry, and you've attended pressers, and you know there's a whole nature of sometimes people will be going through the motions, be that the person sitting there taking the questions or those asking them, and I totally get it because it becomes part of a routine. It never seems to be routine with Ange, does it? You know, I mean, even last night he was given something tangible when being asked similar kind of questions about where is the progress, is it naivety, and he's given us his vision, and we're buying it, and I don't think we're buying it because we're mugs like we bought the Brendan Rodgers thing. We bought it hook, line, and sinker, right? That he was this lifelong Celtic fan, etc. And just never said that. But he is selling us a vision, and we're buying it, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture of two things for me. One, it is footballing intelligence, and clearly is a lifelong student of the game and really knows. He speaks from a position of authority whenever he speaks about anything football related. And two, it's sincerity. Ange is a genuine guy. He comes across as sincere and honest whenever he speaks, and in a sadly an ever increasing commercially driven, almost sort of a Hollywood style acting kind of thing you get with a lot of particularly English football managers these days. Ange is a genuine 100% down the middle kind of guy, and that is exactly what you want, and what I think Celtic as a predominantly working class fan base appreciate.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the fan base, actually, because I wasn't lucky enough to be at the game. The very fact that you and I are on today and Dan was on today, and JP isn't, is because he's over in Spain. As is Declan, as is Colin, and as is Natasha, and I think maybe David as well. They're over at the game. We're not.
No.
But what about the fans? Again, we've got to highlight this, right? So some footage started filtering in. I know Kevin and John yesterday spoke about it. The Spanish police are notoriously heavy-handed with football fans. The fact that Celtic fans won't occur to them that they're going to behave or any of this kind of thing. They will treat Celtic fans the same as they will treat any fans of any British team going over there, and it looked as though they had been a bit heavy-handed. And then you look at the scenes after the game last night, Liam, and Real Madrid fans going on about Celtic fans being the greatest in the world, and us actually just being there and having a party and appreciating the experience. Big shout out to everybody who made the trip.
Yeah, and I would just say, please don't let the actions of some of the Spanish police put you off the Spanish people. I've been to Spain many times. Absolutely wonderful people, warm, friendly, welcoming people. I hope someday when world travel gets back to normal, I can take my wife to Spain for a wee holiday, because she's always wanted to go there. I just think, Real Madrid fans are all right in my book, and the Spanish folk are okay in my book too. And let's not let a few idiots and their police force spoil it.
No, for sure. Absolutely. And again, when we look at the performance, Ange pointed out, we have gone into this campaign, Liam, right? And virtually every game, if not every game, we have been missing a pivotal member of the team. So Carter Vickers has missed games. Starfelt makes his Champions League debut last night. McGregor's missed games. Jota's missed games. We've had these issues to contend with in this campaign. We've got a disappointment, but it's got to be a balanced view on it. We've got to say, listen, the margins in some of the games have been very, very short. They've been very, very short. Last night, maybe not so much. But let's look at some of the kind of positives. Firstly, Ange is going on about how we play to our principles and our style and our philosophy, Liam, and we will learn to adapt. With the experience, we'll learn to adapt. Now, I do believe that, because I'm looking at the performances that we've seen from Hatate, O'Reilly, Greg Taylor, and Jota, just to name 4 players that come to my mind. And the performances that they've got surely will strengthen their own belief that they belong at that level. So when they approach the Champions League next season, if we're in it, and hopefully we are, they can do so completely differently without these anxieties that Ange has spoken about.
When we're in it, not if. Come on, let's stay positive here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally agree. I think that, as I said, last night was maybe the only game where you could say we've been truly outclassed. And even then, we did compete for a period of time. And, like I said before, there's no shame when that happens against Real Madrid. But every other game this season, we've shown that Celtic have shown that they belong at this level. The trick now is to get into a position where we can win consistently at this level. Mm-hmm. And that will come. I believe it will come. And Ange's idea of, I play the same way against Real Madrid as I do against Motherwell, I think spot on. Speaks again to the guy's authenticity, which is one of the reasons why I'm so glad that he's our manager.
Yeah, I think that initially there were calls that that it was naive, and people were looking back to the approach that the aforementioned Brendan Rodgers had in Europe. It didn't work, Liam. We were picked apart. There was a naivety. There was real weaknesses in that approach. But Ange, the way that he explains it seems completely different. I mean, I look at that game last night and I think to myself, like I mentioned earlier, if we did change our approach last night, then it could have been a lot worse. I mean, there's a point coming in here from Jungle Lion. Welcome to the show. Madrid knocked out Liverpool, Man City, Chelsea and PSG last season. No shame in the defeat. But we have to learn fast, and a higher class of player, not easy, I know. Now, following on from that, Paul Foley says, do higher class players want to play in the SPL? There are obviously drawbacks to being at a club like Celtic, simply because of the fact that we're not in an elite league. Okay, we're a massive football club, Liam. We're not in an elite league. And the top players want to be playing their football in elite leagues, and we know that. So we try to be more shrewd in our business dealings. But since Ange has come in, I think we've done that. I mean, you've got a player in O'Reilly, and it's not a flash in the pan because Hatati's done it, and various other players. Abada, we've plucked these players from different markets, and I think that the recruitment has been key, but has to remain to be successful in order for us to make this Ange plan work. But no, we're not going to buy a ready-made Champions League player, but what we can do is spot the potential and turn them into Champions League players. Do you believe that?
Yes, exactly. And I think that going to these quote-unquote unfancied markets, such as Japan, such as Russia, such as Israel, where we are getting these players from, it's because it's a two-way thing. Because on one hand, you as a buying club, Celtic can get a much better deal, a much bigger bang for their buck, right? I mean, how much would a player of Kyogo's ability cost in England? Right? If you want to sign a guy like that from Newcastle or Man City, you're talking like 50, 60, maybe 100 million, right? We get Kyogo for what was it, about 4 million. And even then, that was a Japanese transfer record at the time. Then you have, going the other way, a Japanese player looking to go to Europe and make a name for himself. He looks at Celtic and he sees massive club, huge stadium, worldwide support. Yeah. Almost virtually guaranteed Champions League football, definitely guaranteed European football every year. That is an excellent platform for a player from one of these supposed lesser nations to come and really make a name for himself. They don't have that same kind of, for want of a better phrase, snootiness towards the SPL that somebody coming from, say, England, France, Germany, or Spain might have.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, we've got to look at the success of some of the players that we have brought in. When we brought them in, they weren't Champions League standard, but they have gone on, in Van Dijk's case, for example, to win the Champions League. So, no, we can't buy ready-made players, but we have to be very shrewd in our business. And I think there was a period of time where it was one of these things, Liam, hit or miss. Every now and again we got a success, but there was a lot of players coming through the doors that just weren't up to scratch. And we've refined that under Ange. And it looks as though we're going to continue to in January as well. I said yesterday, actually, Liam, that, the first transfer window I felt was to try and sort out the starting 11. Get players in that are going to start because the team was shambolic when Ange arrived. And then the second transfer window was more about, right, we need to bolster the squad. And those 4 players coming in January were pivotal in us going on to win the league. And then the transfer window just passed for me was all about really strengthening the squad. And in January, I think, is about improving that, really improving the squad, so that if you're looking at a centre-half, and at the moment the option on the bench is maybe Stephen Welsh, we've got a better option. I'm just picking one player, by the way, but no disrespect to Welsh, I like him as a player. John Puska. If Celtic was a stable CL team, then why can't we get bigger names? Now, this leads me on to that discussion whereby when you look at the 3 transfer windows that we have already been in with Ange, I think we have got bigger names because we went out and signed Jota and Carter Vickers. So that in terms of the level and the finance, that is stepping it up a bit, Liam. But a club like Celtic at the moment can't be buying 2 players like that in every transfer window, can we?
No, and to be quite frank, I don't want to. I would much rather we bring raw talents and refine them and adapt them to our style, because you save money in the short term, and in the long term, if you can get these players to the level you believe they can reach, which Ange has shown he can do with players, then your profit down the line is going to be huge. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to have superstars to win the Champions League. You need to have a good team. Case in point, right? I hate to bring this up. Apologies for anybody that's about to get trauma flashbacks, but Porto of the early 2000s, right? Narrowly beat us in the UEFA final. Then the following year they won the Champions League.
Yeah.
Now, before that, if we're being honest, how many of their players had you actually heard of?
No, exactly. If I'm going to be honest,
right.
I would say none.
Yeah,
quite frankly.
Two or three maybe if you were a real football stato, right? But, that shows you what you can do when you have a good manager, mm-hmm. when you have a good recruitment policy, and when you have good tactics and utilising what you have to the best of its advantages. Porto beat us in the final in a very cynical kind of, not the most elegant way, but it was effective, and it was what got Mourinho his big move onto England in the fullness of time as well. Mm-hmm. To this day, he still says that Celtic's the hardest team he's ever played in Europe. You know that, right? He's
always shown a bit of respect. I remember when he was the manager of Real Madrid and we played them over was it in the States? I think it was in the States, wasn't it? That was the game when McGeoch got injured. There was a really bad injury to McGeoch. He was playing very well up to that point. And I remember him speaking about, going back because Neil Lennon was in charge of Celtic, Mourinho was in charge of Real Madrid, and they were looking back to the game in Seville. And he's always, love or loathe him, because there's a lot of people don't like him, but he's always been very respectful of Celtic, Liam. And that goes a long way in my book, by the way. Always, because even when Vinicius Jr. came out during the week there and said that you look at the league table and Celtic's quality isn't reflected in their position. And I don't think he was saying that to try and be our friend. I just think there was a respect there, wasn't there?
Yeah. I think it's just, when you are as big a team as Celtic and you're not at the top table of European football, despite the fact that you probably should be, I think that guys like Vinicius Jr. are going to hopefully read up a wee bit about what we're about as a club and where we've came from, and maybe just think, those guys are deserving a wee bit of respect,
A proper football club, as some might say. Let's have a wee look here then. Paddy Lavery, welcome back, Paddy. Hope you're well. Showing us a wee picture of Georgie Best in the hoops there. Love that photo. Afternoon all. At least there was no excuses from Ange after the game, unlike some other managers. This goes back to the point you made, Liam. We just want the truth. We just want people to be brutally honest. And we have heard a lot of excuses. We have heard that whole thing about budgets and we can't buy players, we can't spend 100 million quid. And I'm sorry, that doesn't even enter his mind. He still believes in his mind that he could probably do something in the Champions League regardless of budgets. He's that type of, the glass ceiling thing doesn't exist for him. And I think that what that does, though, it does tap into our mentality as working class football fans, Liam, like you were saying earlier. He's a no BS kind of manager. Walter comes in. Walter Orr, welcome back to the show. Last night was awesome. This is a fantastic wee comment. Listen to this. Not great result, but what a noise we made after Jota's goal. And in the car park after, I personally was thrilled. My first away trip in the Champions League at 70. A highlight in my life. How great is that, Liam?
That is brilliant. That's exactly the kind of stories you love to hear. But thanks for tuning in, Walter, and thanks for sharing that. That puts a smile on my face. That really does.
It's superb, isn't it? And you think to yourself, I remember going back to Seville. You mentioned Seville, and to that point, as a Celtic fan, my first game was 87. So in terms of European football, we were never massively successful during the time that I'm watching the club. Then Martin O'Neill comes in, takes us to Seville, takes us to the UEFA Cup final, Liam. And I I remember speaking about that, and I had this attitude in my mind, and it wasn't complacent, but I fully believed we would do it again. I believed that we had turned a corner, and with Martin O'Neill there, and with his kind of philosophy, and it was a different philosophy from Ange's, because he did like spending big, did O'Neill, and it worked. That's fine. But I did feel at that time that there would be more experiences like that, and here we've got Walter going to his first away day in Europe at 70, and I sometimes ask myself, will I ever experience a European final again? By the way, I don't think it's beyond us. Maybe not a Champions League, but I don't think a European final is beyond Celtic. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I don't like it when we compare ourselves to the other mob, but they did it last season, so why can't we? You can't tell me that team from Ibrox of last season has done something that we can't do. If they're able to get to the Europa League final, then so are we, and we will do it playing much better football, I think, when the time comes.
Yeah, that's another thing though, because if we're going to do it, we'll be doing it Ange's way, and we'll be doing it with all his principles in place. If we go next season and we finish in such a way in the Champions League where we remain in Europe, for example, Liam, and there is that step down, that's, I think, where you're actually going to see what the benefit has been to get the Champions League games under your belt. By which time you're going to have players with a dozen games under their belt, Liam. And then you start playing European football at a slightly lesser level. Still a lot of good teams in there. And it's at that point that I think you can see the difference.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, again, no disrespect to this team in particular, but when you come away from having played the likes of Real Madrid or Leipzig and you drop down, you're far less likely to get sucker punched by a team like Boro Glimt, because you've already played against much better teams than that. So, yeah.
For sure. You mentioned sucker punch. Just as I was looking at the boxing gloves on the kangaroo behind you, tell us a wee bit about Celtic Down Under just while you're on, Liam. We need to get a wee plug in for the podcast.
Celtic Down Under, we do shows every Wednesday. That would be late morning Celtic Park time. They're up on YouTube, and you can download the podcast as well. Celtic Down Under. Give us a wee follow on the YouTube channel, and we are an interesting group. There's four of us based in Australia, and myself up here in Japan, but we're all in the same kind of time zone, so it fits. And it's interesting because Jared, my friend who founded the Celtic Down Under podcast, he set that up, about 3 years ago. And, I joined beginning of last season. And season before last, was it? Anyway, we're now in a position where those guys are in Australia. We have an Australian manager, and I'm in Japan. And we have 4 Japanese players, none of which was the case when we first started doing the pod. So it's really nice the way everything's kind of, as the A-team would say, I love it when a plan comes together.
No, by the way, imagine 3 years ago if someone had said that to Jared, he wouldn't have believed you. And of course, our relationship has grown from the charity weekenders that we do every December, and none more so than this December because of the state that the country's in, and globally in actual fact. But there's definitely going to be a massive push this Christmas. I'm going to take a wee photo actually and stick it up on the socials. We've got a wee wall in the studio, Liam, where we put up our letters from the recipients of any cash that is raised and donated, and the vast majority of that is done via this platform on the Charity Weekender. I'm going to put that up because we're sitting at around, I think it's 83 grand, 82.5 grand or something like that, and we're pushing a charity single this Christmas to try and push that over 100 grand and obviously give all the profits to charitable causes. And the single itself is superb. The final mix is going to be taking place next week, and various wee layers will be put onto that. People will be aware of the band The Wakes. If you're tuning into Acsom, you'll know all about The Wakes, and they have done a fantastic job on this tune. So the charitable ethos and heritage of this club is alive and well, isn't it, Liam? As always.
Yep, and just a wee thought there. If anybody's a wee bit worried about the single, do not worry. I will not be contributing any of my karaoke vocals to that record. So
I did want to, Liam, but I was prevented from doing so by those who obviously have more
musical
ability,
taste.
and taste in the world of music. Facebook user, sorry, I don't know who I'm speaking to, but thanks for getting involved. There's a wee sign-up process on Facebook, and then your avatar and name comes up. And Ange, we trust, our wizard from Oz, hail, hail. You know, all this, they keep the faith, it became a mantra for the time under Neil Lennon. But it became something that I didn't want to hear at that time, because it was preventing people from seeing what the problem was,
Yeah.
But when I now see in Ange we trust, I don't feel the same way, because I do feel as though we are on a journey, Liam, and we're all pretty sure where that journey has taken us. There is a huge difference, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, getting behind an idea that you agree with, be it social, political, sporting, whatever, is the right idea. Blindly following something because you're too obstinate to see it's going wrong is not a good idea. And dare I say, that mentality has created a lot of the social political problems we have in the world at the moment.
Yeah. If you imagine, politically, if you were just to blindly follow a political party, then
Yes.
back in the day, and my dad is a striking miner, and the whole family were Labour voters, Liam. And then when you come to an age and you vote Labour, because it's for the working classes, of course. And then, as you get older and the changes that you see in that party, if you were just to continue to, vote for them, then you're voting for a party you no longer believe in. And it's a wee bit like that with Celtic. Football's different. I remember Jim Kerr saying, and it was a great quote in a book, you can change your name, you can change your wife, you can even change your political party, but you never change your football club. And that's true, right? But you can change your view on certain parts of that club. And that's where we were, I think, in Lenny's final season. But I was asked a question this morning, Liam, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. And I spoke about it yesterday. Ange Postecoglou, and I don't speak for all Celtic fans, I've got to get that disclaimer in, has got the backing of a massive percentage, a massive part of the Celtic fan base, to the point where he can come out after a 5-1 drubbing and speak to us, like via the press conference, and we buy it. And I don't think it's blind loyalty. So what is it that Ange has that previous managers haven't had?
It's the old adage that, respect is earned, it's not a given. And Ange has given us as fans some fantastic memories over the past year and a bit. We have won a championship, which at the beginning of the season nobody thought we would get close to, myself included. He's earned He's earned the privilege of being allowed to brush off a 5-1 defeat, whereas other managers might even find themselves at risk of their job if they took such a drubbing. Unless, of course, they're managing a team who can't afford to sack them, but that's a story for another time.
Whoever could you mean? By the way, whilst it's in my eye line, right, I'm looking at that jersey, which will be over your left shoulder. Is that an Australian Kappa top? Is that Kappa that made that one?
That is South Africa, 1998. Right. It is Kappa. Yeah. It
is an absolute cracker of a jersey. What's your thoughts on the rumours around Celtic releasing a 4th jersey this season?
Well, we talked about this on Celtic Down Under yesterday, and as Jared and I were in agreement that it would make a beautiful away strip next season. Mm-hmm. There is absolutely no need for Celtic to release a 4th kit just now. As other Celtic-minded people have said in recent years, Celtic, read the room, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I made a suggestion. I don't believe even in the 3rd kits. I understand why they're there, Liam. I know it's a commercial thing, right? I know that Adidas and Celtic will say, but this is how many we sell, so there's a need for it. There's no need for it. There might be a want for it, right?
Yeah.
But I've never really been into 3rd kits unless there's a need in terms of, right, there's going to be a colour clash. But even then, I'm pretty sure you could come up with an away jersey that, unless you come up against an obscure European club, you can get away with two shirts. And my suggestion was, right, okay, if we're at that stage now, and we obviously are, where we're going to be releasing 3 jerseys every season, then the 3rd jersey should always be a fundraising jersey. And my kind of view on it was, do we do enough for the Former Players Association, for example? Well, why not the money raised through the sales of the third jersey go to the former players and their widows and their families? Because we both know that prior to the modern day influx of cash, a lot of these legends didn't make fortunes, Liam, and they retire from the game. They don't have a great deal. Some of them are still working. Some of them have passed away and their widows haven't got a great deal. And I just thought, the club might say, but we've already worked that into our projected figures for the merchandise. People go into the shop to buy it and they might buy something else as well, I just think there's a better way of doing it. Do you think that would work, Liam?
Yeah, I'd be all for that. And the other thing is with, with the former players, even more recent players might not have made as much money out of the game as you might have thought. I'll share a wee anecdote here very briefly. Lubo Moravcik and my dad had some business together a few years ago, and he told us that in his final 2 years at Celtic, he was getting £10,000 a week, which is funny money, right? But considering the talent of Lubo Moravcik, right? And he said that was the highest salary he ever earned in his entire career. Because he said that in response to an interview in the papers at the time from, I think it was Gary Caldwell, saying that Celtic had made a derisory offer of 25 grand a week to get him to extend his contract.
Wow.
And here is a quote you can take to the bank, right? Lubo Moravcik said, and I'm quoting verbatim, "There is more talent in a discarded Moravcik toenail than there is in an entire Gary Caldwell."
Oh, Big Gaza, if you're tuning in, stick that one in your pipe and smoke it. Oh, my word. Lubo. But you're right. I mean, obviously 10 grand a week would be, beyond our wildest dreams, most people's wildest dreams. But we know that whatever they're making, it's condensed into a period of, 15 years, 20 if you're lucky, unless you're Nakamura and you lose count of how many years. But Lubo Moravcik, that is probably, an era that you did think was cash rich, and these players have all retired, Liam, and they've got investments here and there, but it's not always the case, and that for me is a massive part of what we can do. Obviously, we've got a phenomenal charitable arm in the foundation. The work they do is off the scale. We spoke about the 400 grand helping people in fuel crisis. That's the kind of thing that makes me proud time and time again to be a Celtic supporter. And,
absolutely.
We try and chip in as much as we possibly can. The fans are unbelievable whenever we do something. But yeah, third jerseys, fourth jerseys, and I love my football shirts, as you know. But no, it's just a cash in, so let's do something a wee bit better with them. Liam, it's been an absolute pleasure. That's been a very quick hour.
As always,
it was absolutely great to hear from you. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved in the chat. There's loads of reasons to be cheerful. We're going for a treble this season as well. Back to the domestic stuff. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. Thank you, Liam Carrigan, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.